two. 1, 2, 3, 4. Take me anywhere, I don't care. And in a darkened underpass, I thought my chance would come at last. And then a strange fate gripped me and I just couldn't ask. Take me out tonight. Take me anywhere, I don't care. Driving in your car, I never want to go home because I haven't got one. No, I haven't got one. And if a double-decker bus crashes into us, to die by your side, such a heavenly way to die.
How about now?
If it's
Any better? I'll look at the chat in a second. Any better?
to die by your side, pleasure the privilege is mine.
Can you hear me now? I just changed one of the audio settings.
And it never goes out. There is a light and it never goes out. There is a light and it never goes out. There is
I can't see on the desktop that they can hear me. 1 second, let me try. Okay, you can hear me now, Lisa? Somebody confirm. Lisa just said she can hear me. I want to welcome you guys. I know it's kind of frustrating with the audio and also me putting on music at the beginning. One of the reasons I'm putting music on at the beginning for whatever live streams I'm doing from now on is because it has been kind of a frustrating experience being on YouTube. That's the end of the song, and I'll talk about the song itself in a second. Not that I know too much about it, but the reason I'm putting some audio on at the beginning, music on, is that it's like, I really worked hard from April until the beginning of this month to put together that story about John Mattis. Unfortunately, I tried hard. Other people tried hard. Hard Bastard is still going to help me. Other people are going to help me with disseminating the story. I don't think people really do care. I think people have moved on, and they don't want to hold the media figures that are exposed in that story accountable, whether it is Maddow or the Huffington Post, Ryan Grimm of the Intercept. And it's like I have more things to do now. For example, I had to mow the lawn today. I had to do some work for somebody else today. Tomorrow I have to go into work, and I'm not going to let YouTube become a source of constant frustration for me. That was a problem with my life for a while, because during the day I just constantly think about what I would do for YouTube, and I'm still going to work on putting together good topics for you, but I'm not going to follow. I'm not going to follow just the popular topics all the time. I am extremely determined to continue covering South America, to continue covering other issues that are going on in our hemisphere whenever I can, and it's not going to deter me that other people don't care about it. Just like it didn't deter me that people didn't care about the fake news regarding Bernie Sanders supporters being called Russian trolls. Because I don't really care if there's more subscriptions or less subscriptions, or more views or less views, or like with the Patrick Little video, more people logging on to call me a fat, ugly Jew than people that actually address what's in the video, with him freaking out at Mad Dodge Productions. So we're going to discuss the issue of the pink tide today. Now, I will talk about the music first. Noel Gallagher is, in my opinion, one of the most underrated musicians in the world. Musicians, songwriters, maybe in terms of technical skill, you could probably find a lot of people who are more adept than him, certainly in the metal world. Kirk Hammett, or Eddie Van Halen, who I'm also a fan of them. I'm a fan of thrash metal and everything, but it's very therapeutic to listen to somebody who succeeds in making such melodic hits like Noel Gallagher. Now, when I tried the first time this stream, I did use one of his songs from the Royal Albert Hall concert back in I believe it was 2015 or 14, when he did a benefit concert on behalf of the Teenage Cancer Trust, and it was probably one of the best live performances I've ever seen. And it's something that I've enjoyed less and less since 2016, since I've become more and more focused on talking about political issues, talking about issues that are not really, they're not recreational. So, a lot of people are getting more stressed out with their politics, and I think people should take, kind of an excursion back into themselves once in a while. Listen to the things that used to make them happy, see if it works again, and it does. I was working earlier last week using this as my background music. It's much better than listening to blogs once in a while. Although you should, obviously you should stay up to date with things that are important going on. Anyway, so I want to thank Metadata Man, Lisa PDX, Shreebs, Memes of Destruction for joining me. Please share this if you know somebody who would be interested in it. We're going to talk about the left in Latin America, and people do not understand that the rest of the world thinks about the United States because we're a leading economic power. Why is it that the United States seems to focus on the Middle East and Europe to the exclusion of Latin America, whether it's Central or South America, and the Caribbean, by the way, which is a kind of a different region linguistically? Most of the states in the Caribbean are English speaking, with a couple of exceptions. But why is it that the United States seems to ignore Latin America, seems to look at it as almost a backwater, and yet the left the progressive people, whether it is out and out socialists and communists or so-called social democrats, seem to look at Latin America as they were looking at it as a harbinger of progress in the past. Before that, they were looking at it as a template for oppression. And what are they doing now? They're returning to looking at it as a template for oppression because their experiments over there have, without exception, ended up as complete and utter failures. So why are we, as people who, those of us that are, I mean, if you're a socialist, go ahead. I mean, you don't have to agree with me. If you're somebody who's neutral on this topic, you don't have to agree with me. Why are we, as proponents of the free market, as proponents of more devolution of the powers, the economic powers, to the lowest level possible, ending state welfare and basically, the management of the private individual by the state? Why aren't we looking at Latin America and saying, going case by case basis, showing this is the region of the world where all of these people who claim that they were on the side of the worker have turned out to be complete and utter frauds? Okay, this is Noam Chomsky on Democracy Now! Noam Chomsky is an icon of the left. He is basically one of the people who has been used by the left as their template for the great intellectual, the person who has who has the credibility to speak out on any topic whatsoever. They'll look at Sam Harris, who I'm not a fan of, and they'll say, why is a neurologist commenting on Islam? They'll look at people who criticize their ideas, and they'll say, well, you're just some sort of Koch brothers shill. Okay, well, I'll tell you out and out, I don't support the Koch brothers, and I don't know them, and I don't care about them. The Koch brothers don't formulate my opinions. Okay, I do my own research. I'd like to think the people in my audience do too, and I think a lot of you do. I know Larry was on the previous stream. Yeah, Larry's on here. You don't have to necessarily take one side on every issue. You can move around. So, yeah, I see Larry is back. In any case, this is Chomsky on Democracy Now!, which is basically hosted by that old, decrepit, middle-aged windbag, Amy Goodwin.
I wanted to continue on the situation in Nicaragua. In a rare interview, the Nicaraguan president, Daniel Ortega, recently rejected calls to step down from power amidst mounting protests and civil unrest. This is President Ortega speaking on Fox News on Monday.
We were elected by the voters.
Hay periodos electorales.
So there have been electoral periods, there are term limits,
un periodo electoral
and
tiene su límite en el año 2021.
Our electoral period ends with the elections of 2021, when we will have our next elections.
Para decidir quién asumiría a través de los
And
votos, quién asumiría el
then we'll have to see who will be voted in for the new administration.
So that's President Daniel Ortega. Nicaragua's main business association has been demanding Ortega hold early elections, to which Ortega's responded Nicaragua is not private property. International human rights groups say over 300 people have died since their protests erupted in April, anti-austerity protests, and that the vast majority have been killed by pro-government forces.
Excuse me. I should have timed that cough, but this is Democracy Now! Saying this. This isn't Bloomberg, and it's not fucking Forbes, which sucks, by the way, now. Forbes is basically like you read any cultural topic on Forbes, it's like reading GQ, which has also gone completely off the rails. It's like reading, Miss Magazine. It's bizarre. It's like they've all fallen to the communist, feminist onslaught. They don't have, they had their magazines, the feminists. Okay, they've always had them. We've never wanted to take them over. We just don't buy them because they suck. but they've taken over Forbes, and they've taken over a lot of these other magazines as well. You could say ESPN magazine is basically an SJW magazine now. Sports Illustrated for years has been like that. But this is Democracy Now! Admitting that, according to most sources, over 300 people have been killed in Nicaragua by pro-government forces. Okay, so I don't want to hear anybody telling me that I'm getting my news from the fucking Koch brothers.
In June, we spoke with former Sandinista leader Alejandro Bendaña, who served as the Nicaraguan ambassador to the United Nations and Secretary General of the Nicaraguan Foreign Ministry during Ortega's rule, during the Sandinista rule in Nicaragua from 1979 to 1990. This is what Bendaña had to say on Democracy Now!
One has to remember key historical facts. The Sandinista revolution began in 1979 and ended in 1990 with the electoral defeat of Daniel Ortega. But this does not spell the end of Ortega, because for 17 years he worked tenaciously to get back into power. But to do this, he got rid of his potential competitors and many old Sandinista backers. He embraced corporate capital in Nicaragua. He adopted the most retrograded positions of the church and entered into an alliance and reached an understanding with the U.S. so that he was able to barely win the presidency in 2007, but by that time, he himself is no longer a Sandinista. Yes, the trappings, the colors are still there, but his entire government has been, in essence, neoliberal. Then it becomes authoritarian, repressive.
That's Alejandro Bendaña, who served as President
Sorry. Sorry, my audio was off again. That was me this time. It wasn't the computer's fault. So the Sandinistas have, in many cases, already denounced Daniel Ortega. And they know that he's completed these pacts. He's basically sold his soul to the Catholic Church, and in their mind, that's the worst thing in the world. Even though, the Catholic Church, to be honest with you, it's probably the last thing left in Nicaragua that actually gives people any sense of an alternative, unfortunately. And it's not the best alternative, if we're being honest. So this person essentially admitted it, that he's retrograde. But what have we've been hearing for all these years? That Ortega is bringing back equality, eliminating the disparity in income in Nicaragua. It hasn't really happened. And I want to remind you, there is one theme in this video and in every video that the fucking progressive left does not mention in Nicaragua, but we're going to leave that till the end of this video.
Ortega's Nicaragua's ambassador to the United Nations, as well as Secretary General of Nicaraguan Foreign Ministry during the Sandinista rule, first time around 79 to 90. Students are saying that overwhelmingly it's the government that's killed the people. What are your thoughts, Noam?
Well, in 1990, it's true that first of all, there were plenty of problems even in the 80s, but by the standards of the region, it stood out as almost a stellar record. Bad, but...
So for those of you that don't know, this is Noam Chomsky, who is considered by left-wingers to be basically Christ himself. Essentially, I mean, it really does mirror, except for the fact that he was crucified. He almost is literally the Christ of the left, because he is Jewish, and they consider him their savior and their source for literally everything. And it says here, it says linguist, comma, author, comma, dissident. That's his claim to fame, that he's a linguist, that he's an author, and that he's a dissident. It doesn't matter that there's other people who speak out on similar topics, like Sam Harris. I always use the example of Sam Harris because that disgusting wench, Abby Martin, wondered why he would comment on anything like Islam. And it's like, how about you shut the fuck up too? Because you apparently, I think she had like a bachelor's of communications or something, and she's talking to Sam Harris, who is a neurologist. And by the way, I'm not a fan of Sam Harris, but let's hear him basically admit that Nicaragua is up the creek with no paddle.
By the standards of the region. In 1990, President Bush, first President Bush, essentially informed the population of Nicaragua that either you vote for our candidate or else the Contra war, the terrorist war, continues and harsh sanctions will strangle the country. And indeed, at the point of a gun, the population voted the Sandinistas out, and partially for the internal reasons. There were many things they were doing they shouldn't have. Since then, it hasn't been anywhere near.
So what they do is, you'll notice here, he says that the internal reasons why people choose to vote against a quote-unquote progressive government are not the real reasons, even though everybody, it's a very well-known mantra in politics that all politics is local. Yet they want it to seem as if the United States is manipulating literally every election around the world. And Nick's Radio brings up the quote that Chomsky once, without irony, claimed that the Republican Party is the most evil organization in history. That's true. It wasn't that long ago, in fact. And that makes it, he puts them above the Nazis. He puts them above the Roman Empire. He puts them above the Japanese, who slaughtered millions and millions of people in China and in Malaysia and all that. He puts them above the Republican Party, above the Nazis. He puts the Republican Party above the Soviet Union. He puts the Republican Party above, look at any, what about, if it's the most evil organization in history, what about Jim Jones People's Temple, an organization that caused all of its people to commit suicide? I think it was in 1979. And he thinks that this is and by the way, I'm not a Republican, and I don't support the Republicans blindly. There are times when you have to vote for people that'll give you basically, at least a hope that something good will happen, and then you have to keep them accountable. That's the challenge there. But to call them the most evil organization in history basically shows that this guy is. If it's the most evil organization in history, why aren't you fleeing MIT in Boston? Why are you staying in the United States of America at your cushy job at an Ivy League college? Get the fuck out of here. We don't need you. Okay. Let's hear the rest of it.
As bad as the other Central American countries, the ones that are more or less overwhelmingly influenced by the U.S., but it's been a lot of corruption, a lot of repression. It's autocratic, undoubtedly. The opposition is nothing to write home about either, for the most part. So it's by no means a pretty situation. One would hope that negotiations could reduce the tensions, and my own view is that I think it would be a good thing for Nicaragua if Ortega were to call early elections and allow them to be run without corruption and brutality. But that doesn't look as if it's hard to see a simple way out at this point. It's a very unfortunate situation. We should bear in mind that in the early 1980s, the situation was extremely hopeful in Nicaragua. The international institutions like the World Bank and others were praising the progressive steps being taken by the Sandinistas. The country was full of hope, excitement, literacy campaigns, dealing with poverty, with the the U.S. intervention.
This is something they also do all the time. They point to something that happened almost 40 years ago. the Sandinistas, when they took power, yes, they expanded social programs. Okay, that was almost 40 years ago. And since then, what happened? What happened? The Sandinistas were, by the way, very hardcore in their control of the populations. Okay, I'll show you something about that in a second. Not just the population as a whole, but specific populations in particular.
Expansion actually began in the mid-19th century and had been horrible all the way through, but they were beginning to pull themselves out of it until the U.S. terrorist war began. We should bear in mind that the United States is the only country ever to have been condemned by the International Court of Justice for international terrorism, technically unlawful use of force, and ordered to pay substantial reparations to Nicaragua for the attack that it was carrying out. Of course, the U.S. refused World Court jurisdiction. The World Court was condemned not only by the government, but even by the press. New York Times condemned it as a hostile forum because it had ruled against the United States. So, of course, we don't have to pay any attention to it. The U.S. even vetoed a Security Council resolution calling on states to observe international law. And then the Contra War went on, the sanctions went on, the other forms of subversion continued, and the hopes were pretty much smashed. You could just see the changes in expectations and attitudes, and one result was internal corruption, repression, and then it's now imploding. But again, it's a very ugly and unfortunate situation, nothing remotely comparable to the countries that have been under the U.S. thumb throughout the period. But I think the point that going back to the immigration crisis, which is actually a moral crisis in the United States and comparably in Europe, we should bear in mind that the immigrants do not want to leave their countries.
So I want to pause it there. I want to bring in this. This is from Fox News, so I will say that. It says, this is from 2010. Nicaraguan prosecutors. Hold on, let me see if. Yeah, my microphone's on. I have to check now. Nicaragua's Attorney General has dropped a complaint against President Daniel Ortega and other former Sandinista officials in the killings of at least 64 Mosquito Indians by Nicaraguan troops in the early 1980s. It's Miskito. They're a real tribe. It's not some sort of parody. They're called Mosquito Indians because there's a Mosquito Coast of Nicaragua. Prosecutor Ana Julia Guido told reporters Monday that the case was dropped because of insufficient evidence about who gave the orders to engage in the confrontation. So it's not that this didn't happen. It's that nobody will testify against him. Okay, so who knows? I mean, yes, innocent until proven guilty, but this did happen and he was the leader of that country. So how come nobody wants to hold him accountable for crimes against humanity on an international basis? Because they don't give a fuck. If this was another country, if it was Burma, where people are really bent out of shape about the Rohingya, not to say that it's not important, I'm just saying they would want him held accountable for it because they are Muslims. If it was Palestine, of course, they would want him held accountable because it is Muslims, also Palestinians. If it was, let's say, what's another country like this? If it was Italy and these were gypsies, they would want these people held accountable because they are very against the Italian government basically protecting the right of Italy to do as it sees fit. And they don't kill people in Italy left and right. The government doesn't, at least. There are, certain organizations that will do it, but we're not going to get into that. This is literally, Americans have to know that the Sandinistas, at least the ones that are still affiliated with Ortega, do not give a bleeding shit about the human rights of literally anyone, the least of which are Indians. It's the same pattern you see throughout South and Central America. They don't give a flying fuck. Okay? This is literally the opposite of what progressivism is taught around the world. Now, those of us that are not progressive admittedly say, these people, indigenous peoples, they don't necessarily have the right to keep their lands. I personally don't agree with that. I think that they have private property rights. It happens to be a lot of them live communally, and we should respect their rights, and we should negotiate if we have to. If we have to use, try to use their land for something, they should at least get a seat at the table. I was against the Dakota Access Pipeline. Okay, those of us that are, that's one of the reasons, I kind of depart from these people who are quote unquote conservatives who say, well, we have to go in favor of progress. We have to build more pipelines and everything. I think that we should be able to respect the rights of indigenous peoples and try to do these pipelines and try to accommodate both. But, I'm probably not popular on either side in my stance. Let me see what everybody says here. They want Haraj. I don't know what Haraj is. I think he meant jihad. Perseus is here. Is it me or does... He says, I'm being sarcastic, by the way, because I know that's not what Noam Chomsky meant. Okay, I don't know what he's talking about. America pay reparations to WHK. I don't know what WHK is. Is it just me, or does Chomsky sound like an elder Jimmy Stewart if you were on Ritalin? Americans mostly don't care about other people, just pretend to, or throw money at the leadership of the people we pretend to care about for the corrupt government to steal. So yeah, I think that it's ironic here. Whatever you think about the rights of indigenous peoples, people on the right are generally not known to support them. I think it's kind of a problem in certain cases. I think this would be a case where I would support them. Nobody should have to take the land away from these Mosquito Indians without some sort of just compensation. And if they refuse to do it, I oppose that. I respect the rights of private property for people like this case, and in fact in the United States as well. If we're doing things on a Sioux reservation without the consent of the local people, I'm not okay with that. The complaints stem from so one of those who filed the complaint claims authorities did not really investigate the case. Marcos Carmona of the Independent Permanent Human Rights Commission says an appeal has already been filed to the Inter-American Human Rights Commission. Ortega has called the accusations a political tactic to smear him. The complaints stem from clashes between Sandinista government forces, which are trying to create a new leftist society after overthrowing dictator Anastasio Somoza in 1979, and the English-speaking Indian peoples of the Caribbean coast who sought greater autonomy. So those of you that don't know, on the Caribbean coast of Nicaragua, there are, first of all, these Mosquito Indians, as well as the descendants of African slaves who don't really, they speak Spanish, but it's their second language. Their first language would be English. Disagreements escalated to armed clashes in 1981 and 1982 and led to the forced relocation of thousands of Mosquitos. Sandinista responses grew heavier as some Indians joined the U.S.-backed Contra rebellion against the leftist government. Carmona said his organization conducted investigations in 8 communities in the region and confirmed that 13 other people had been tortured and 15 were missing. If this had been Chile, where Augusto Pinochet did these same things, the left would be blowing their fucking stack. Okay? And I'm tired of hearing all this stuff about how the right wing is evil and they hate people's rights. There is something like this on both sides of the aisle. There is the lack of respect for the rights of the individual, the due process of law, the rights of communities to defend their private property on both sides of the aisle, and this is perfect evidence of it. Perfect evidence. I think Perseus wanted to say something to me. He said, if Bernie got in, you think the armed forces would turn Sandinista-like? Yes, I think we would certainly have. First of all, I have a theory, and I'm not going to get into it. I was thinking about it for the past few months, that if Bernie Sanders were to be elected, he probably would not live very long anyway. And the person who would succeed him as the head of of whatever fucking movement they would call it would be just an out and out communist piece of crap. Okay? Because he is, after all, I believe he's 74 years old now. He might be, or it might be that he's going to be 74 in 2020. But in any case, yes, I do believe that would happen. I believe it would happen either under him, because he would have to enforce his beliefs somehow. There's no way that you can get people to voluntarily do what he's talking about, or he would probably die in office, and somebody else of the same who would use his legacy would perpetrate things that he probably would never have condoned. Let me see here. So Perseus Gold is all about the national interest. Well, I have to disagree with you. That's not what I believe. So, I mean, we're just going to have to not agree on that. Perseus Gold says, I can only speak for Canada, but the problem is the chiefs and band councils have the power of kings on the reserve for all intents and purposes here. So the government gives them the money, and they are genuinely allowed to spend it all on themselves, and their people live in poverty. Yeah, it's a problem. I mean, you do need accountability. I think I have another listener in the past who's told me that. So forget it. This is the face of socialism in South and Central America. People like Daniel Ortega. And it's not even, now they're saying he isn't really committed to the socialism that they believe in because he made a deal with the Catholic Church. Well, they never said that when he got elected. When he did make that pact with the Catholic Church. And yet Venezuela signed the Caribe agreement with him, giving him subsidized oil. You don't think that it was a little hypocritical? If you're saying that he was not truly a progressive then, you don't think it was a little hypocritical of President Chavez at the time to conclude a pact with him? You don't think that's a little fucked up? If you're criticizing him now you're criticizing him because he happens to have an agreement with the Catholic Church, which is also a little messed up. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. If they really had an issue with Daniel Ortega, Noam Chomsky would have gone on Amy Goodman's shitty show 11 years ago and talked about it. But he's on it now because now the evidence is piled up that this guy is a complete fraud, that Ortega is the type of dictator, the same type of dictator they condemn on the right. They now have one of their own, and he's not the only one.
They would be very happy to stay in their own countries instead of coming here to unpleasant and harsh situations.
They're coming here because of people who run their countries that are like you piece of shit.
They can't because we have ruined their countries. So they...
Not accepting it. We did not ruin Nicaragua today. Spilled some fucking coffee on me. We did not ruin Nicaragua. Fuck this asshole.
First step in dealing with the immigration crisis should be to help reconstruct and rebuild what we have destroyed so they won't be fleeing from the homes where they would like to live. Now, that's certainly within the means of a super-rich country like the United States with incomparable advantages. That's step one in dealing with the immigration crisis. Again, a moral crisis, not an immigration crisis. Secondly, conditions should be established so that what's called legal immigration, I don't like the term, but what's technically called that, would be facilitated with decent conditions, plenty of entry points, lawyers provided, pro bono with...
How about you pay for it, you son of a bitch?
U.S. support for immigrants so they could plead their cases, and decent conditions for the applicants to survive, nothing like putting them in camps and stealing their children away from them, and facilitating the kind of appeals for asylum that are granted under international law and that should be automatically assumed certainly in a rich country like ours. That's the second step. We might also recognize that There are countries that have somehow managed to deal with a huge flood of immigrants, poor countries. So take Lebanon, poor country. Probably 40% of the population are refugees at this point, driven out from Israel by the several Israeli wars, 48, 67.
So this is classic Noam Chomsky. This is why this guy can go die in fucking hell. And I would gladly dance all over the ground day on end, even if I knew I was going to hell, to know that he would be there too. Because yes, you can point at the issues going on with Israelis and Palestinians, but we're not talking about that right now, are we? You shrunken bag of leather shit. Okay? Go ahead. You can talk 15 segments about Palestine and Israel. This is the one segment we want to talk about Nicaragua, and you also want to make it about Palestine and Israel. Which, if that's your choice, don't fucking lie about it. Lebanon has never managed the refugee crisis very well. In fact, the people who live in Lebanon, who are refugees from Syria and Palestine, and from British Mandate Palestine, are not citizens of Lebanon, even if they've lived there for 6 or 7 decades. Even if they haven't been there for 6 or 7 decades, they don't get citizenship there. You don't get citizenship in Lebanon from there. And by the way, I'm not saying, I know people from Lebanon. I understand their issue with giving people citizenship. It's virtually the same issue that we have here with giving other people citizenship that may affect our demographics. There is an issue in Lebanon where the Christian minority don't want to be inundated with a Muslim majority population. Okay, it's not me embellishing the story. That's just the fact. Let me see here. That's very interesting that happened. Christian with the autocorrect. Kristen. Somebody said something that I thought was really interesting. Sreeb said the Sandinistas split into 3 groups after Ortega. Yes, there was the main movement, the FSLN, the Sandinista National Liberation Front, which is him. There's the Sandinista Renovation Movement, the the SRM, the MRS, I think it would be in Spanish. And then there's another group under Eden Pastora, I believe. He might be the same group. I don't remember. But yeah, the Sandinista, the brand name of the Sandinistas is the only thing that matters, because Augusto Sandino himself was not a socialist. He predated the whole socialism issue in Nicaragua. So they just use his name as a brand. It has nothing to do. His legacy doesn't really have anything to do with socialism. I haven't seen this fire in you in a while. Well, I really hate this piece of crap. He is literally the definition of somebody who's been given so much credit for literally nothing. He just mumbles on screen all the time as if he's the voice of morality and whatever. And then he brings up a total fucking lie about Lebanon. If you are a refugee in Lebanon, you are not entitled to citizenship at all. At all.
7 Syrian refugees, Iraqi refugees fleeing from the U.S. invasion of Iraq. It's a poor country, and there are plenty of internal problems, but they're somehow surviving with 40% of the population refugees. The same is true of Jordan, another poor country. Kenya, Africa, another poor country, has a huge number of refugees. Bangladesh has taken in huge numbers of refugees fleeing from Burma. But the rich countries of the world, the United States, the European Union, are the ones who have an overwhelming responsibility for the circumstances from which the refugees are fleeing. They can't help with it. They can't deal with it. Too much for us. Go somewhere else. Go to a poor country, but not go to the countries of the perpetrators of the conditions from which you're fleeing.
We did not do anything related to what happened in Nicaragua in the past 10 years. This is Noam Chomsky just extrapolating from nothing. that the United States ruined Nicaragua for whatever reason. We haven't had sanctions on Nicaragua. They are talking about sanctions, which would be a waste of time because it just give them an excuse to kill more people. We have to decide, first and foremost, are we involved there or are we not involved there? And my opinion is we should not be involved there. We should pretty much, if the U.S. government does have investments there, yes, we should withdraw them in any case. Because what's the point anymore? The country is going to complete shit. So on a practical level, there's no point. This has nothing to do with morality. Okay, because if we were to have a moral argument between myself and Noam Chomsky, we're just talking about completely two different models of everything. There's not going to be any agreement here. Kiana Rainey says the first step would be to tell these people to pull themselves up by the bootstraps. Hold on. And fix their own problems like Black Americans are told to do every day. I believe I've heard a similar argument from Tommy Sotomayor. And, I think that there's some parallels here. But the real issue is that we don't understand. Before we tell people what to do, we're just ignoring what's happening. And finally, the left here. This is how compelling it is. Without any effort on the part of people like myself who are not on the left, I am on the right. Without any effort from the majority of the right-wing people, they have now been forced to admit that the Nicaraguan government is a failure. That they are basically a failed state. That's why this is important. So, I think the whole bootstrap thing is a little beside the point. They can't pick themselves up by the bootstraps anyway because they're being dominated by a socialist loser who's basically, he said, well, I've been elected. I can kill whoever I want there. And I can basically, and there's one issue which we'll leave till the end of, there's only about a minute left on this clip. Less than a minute. I'll leave till the end that they don't mention at all. Okay, and I'm going to mention it. So let's watch the rest of the clip. But yeah, Kiana, you are right. If we keep letting a lot of immigrants in, yeah, we're going to be the poorest country in the world. Just like, by the way, Lebanon is extremely poor because they still have all those refugees.
I mean, it's a grotesque moral crisis throughout the industrial world.
We'll be back with Professor Noam Chomsky on the shakeup of the Democratic establishment and the news you're not getting in 30 seconds.
No, we're getting the same news, you bitch. It's the same garbage as you. You just are less attractive than most of the anchors. The issue here is that they go an entire 11 minutes, however long it is, without mentioning the Chinese canal that they were trying to build in Nicaragua against the wishes of farmers and other citizens. Okay, the Chinese canal is one of the reasons that Ortega is losing popularity. A Chinese canal that will not be built because of the idiocy of Ortega believing the Chinese investors, okay, and saying, oh, well, yeah, we'll let you build a canal across our entire territory in order to compete with Panama, even though there's no assurance that half of the labor, I believe, was supposed to be supplied by China, not by Nicaragua. So the jobs aren't even going to Nicaraguans. Do you believe that shit? Do you believe that shit? And they don't mention it one fucking time. Those pieces of shit. This is what gets my blood boiling. I don't care what's going on necessarily with Kobe Bryant and with LeBron James and all that. I care that we have this lying progressive piece of crap, Noam Chomsky, who wants to rant about how Nicaragua had all this progress in the 1980s due to socialism, but will not mention that this is from the South China Morning Post. It says, Nicaragua's $50 billion rival to the Panama Canal going ahead slowly as funding evaporates and Chinese investor keeps low profile. The canal, if finished, could give China a major foothold in Central America, a region long dominated by the United States. Well, I don't think that the project is going well if you can't come up with the fucking money to do it. Nicaragua's ambitious dream of building a canal to rival Panama's famous waterway looks in peril as doubts pile up over whether its Chinese investor can cough up the $50 billion needed, analysts say. The project has remained completely unfinanced because it doesn't meet reliability requirements, said Eliseo Nunez, a former opposition lawmaker who is now a university professor. The Chinese billionaire who came forward to bankroll the project is Wang Jing through his Hong Kong-based HKND, the Hong Kong-Nicaragua Canal Development Group. A few years ago, he won the contract given by the government of President Daniel Ortega to build and run a 276-kilometer canal that would slice across the country, linking the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. The deal made world headlines both for its sheer scale, but also as a sign of growing Chinese involvement in a region once considered the United States' backyard. If seen through, it has the potential to change the fortunes of Nicaragua, one of the poorest nations in Latin America. So let's look up real quick. What is the GDP of Nicaragua? The national GDP. One second. I don't know why it's censoring Shreves' comments. Sorry, the connection is slow as fuck, in fact. So their GDP is $35.8 billion per year. The total country's GDP. So this canal is actually worth more than Nicaragua makes in a year, technically. If seen through it so Panama earns nearly $2 billion a year in tolls from ships using its waterway, built by France and the U.S. and opened a century ago. Wang said in 2014, as he inaugurated the start of the project, they wanted to see Nicaragua become one of the richest countries in the region. But a year later, the Chinese telecoms tycoon lost a big chunk of his fortune, which was estimated at $10 billion by the financial news agency Bloomberg. Since then, he has cut a low profile. He's a ghost. We haven't seen him since, said Monica Lopez, a lawyer specialized in the environment who wrote a book on the proposed canal. So in any case, we're not going to read through this whole thing. I will put this in the chat because it isn't in the description. So, no, they don't. They talk about Nicaragua for 10 minutes about how the United States is responsible and et cetera and et cetera. They don't mention the canal. The canal is the biggest story of what happened in Nicaragua in the past 5 years. The whole thing with the protests and the Social Security and the retirement age that they did with Ortega in April. Yes, that's important. It is important. But that type of thing is only it's like the straw that broke the camel's back. What really ended the goodwill between him and the people of Nicaragua is the fucking canal he was going to build through their land. YouTube being racist to me. I don't know why you guys are getting censored. I think, is it more than one person getting censored, or is it just Shreves? I don't know what's going on. The difference between the U.S. involvement in the Third World and China's involvement is the U.S. builds roads and schools and churches, but China just rapes the land of their natural resources. Look, I don't have any problem with China doing business with the rest of the world. I just don't want to be blamed for things that they fuck up. I don't think America needs to be blamed for a canal that China wanted to build across Central America that doesn't even get mentioned, because they blame all of the crisis on things that we did in the fucking 80s, as if nothing has changed since then. Is that real journalism? Is that intellectually honest? Is it? Can somebody? If I'm wrong, somebody correct. Are we? When we do something wrong, I don't blame China. When we do something wrong, I don't blame Qatar. Okay, I have said that the CIA has done horrible things in Latin America in the past, and they probably are doing a number of those things today. Although I would say that now, a lot of what's going on over there is mostly the doing of its local governments, as well as countries like China. You know, it's not wrong to criticize China. It doesn't mean I want a war with China. It doesn't mean I don't think China should invest in Latin America. I'm just saying it's their fault with what happened here. You know, it's not my fault. So that's it for, and I'll also put this article in the chat because it is not in this description. So this is from Fox News. Okay, but it is true that there were Mosquito Indians murdered in Nicaragua in the 80s. But the left doesn't give a fuck about them because they were probably fascist Indians or something, like Arjun. I don't know if Arjun is watching today, but if he watches later, people would call him a fascist because he believes that India has the right to its own self-determination. It's the same idea. So this is the real news, blaming the role the U.S. played in reversing Latin America's pink tide. I like that Hillary cough are at a minimum today. No, you missed earlier. We went much worse. Carlos, if you rewind the stream, you're not going to be happy with some of the crap I've said, but, you know, it is what it is. This is Carlos77X. Always good to have him. Always good to have. By the way, if you want to call in on Hangouts, you're welcome to. I know this is a big topic for you too, but if you're not available, that's also fine. So this is the real news talking about the role the U.S. played in reversing Latin America's pink tide. The pink tide was, if you see the thumbnail that we have, that's the group of countries that all went socialist or democratic socialist. Then, good job, Nick's Radio. No, I had to uncensor your comment in order for people to see it. I don't know if people did see it, but I had to uncensor it on my screen. And I even have it on live chat now. So Pinochet is here. We have Carlos77X here. We have Larry here. We have Nick's Radio. We have Kristen, and I think we still have Lisa. So we have a nice group of people here to watch how we fucked up the pink tide. You know, the pink tide was supposed to wash away all of our imperialist bullshit in Latin America. But, you know, unfortunately, we must have pulled the plug on it or something. So here we go.
It's the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Pires coming to you from Baltimore. Less than 10 years ago, Central and South America's pink tide was at its highest point. Most of the continent had leftist or center-left governments in power. However, since 2009, more or less, when Honduras's President Manuel Zelaya was ousted in a right-wing coup, the tide turned, and now a conservative or center-right tide is firmly in place in the region. Except for the recent development of López Obrador in Mexico, how did this undoing of the left tide happen? Of course, opponents of the pink tide say that these governments were elected or forced out of office because of their own policy failures. Another interpretation of all of this is that U.S. foreign policy towards Latin America under President George W. Bush and under President Barack Obama played a key role in reversing the tide. Now, this argument can be found in a letter from Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs Thomas Shannon, who managed Latin America policy desk for both presidents. In truth, it is actually a fictional letter about the advice of Shannon, what he might have given Secretary of State Mike Pompeo when he resigned last month. This hypothetical letter was actually written by Mark Weisbrot, our next guest. Mark Weisbrot joins us now from Washington, D.C. To discuss U.S. Latin America policy managed under Latin American pink tide. Mark is the co-director of the Center for Economic Policy and Research and is the author of the book Failed: What.
Okay, I wanna say a couple things before they get in on the conversation. So first of all, yeah, let me know if the video is getting better because there is an issue. I mean, it's gotten worse with YouTube lately. Maybe it is because Carlos was correct about bullshit. Was it the net neutrality, whatever? But I don't care about that. I mean, I guess, yeah, my videos are shittier than they usually are. Okay. So let me know if it's gotten a little better. I did adjust the bit rate, but it looks like it hasn't. So let me reload this. Yeah, I don't think it's going to get better, guys. So you'll just have to make do with the audio. The second thing is, so I want to set the table here. They are talking about a parody letter that the Council on, I think it's Economic whatever. Let me see here. Mark Weisbrot. It's going to be slow going for a second. So Mark Weisbrot. So that guy, it's a Center for, one second. Here we go. Center for Economic and Policy Research, which it's just a left-wing think tank. So it's not as if they're asking somebody who has an objective opinion here. So it's a parody letter written by him. This is the guy. Hold on a second. So this guy writing in the name of I think it's Thomas Shannon. So the Obama administration official who just recently resigned as Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs. Now, I want to say this. First of all, even if he had written it, who gives a shit? He was an Undersecretary of State for a previous administration. Okay? So who cares? Honestly, who cares? And he'd already been Undersecretary of State before under Obama, but like one time, as well as acting U.S. Secretary of State under Trump when the administration first came in. This is just an Obama guy. It's a former U.S. ambassador to Brazil under Obama. So who gives a fuck what he thinks? You're done. Nobody cares. And you were ambassador to Brazil while they were undergoing some of their worst corruption in history, which we'll probably, I don't think we'll touch on Brazil today, but we'll touch on a number of other countries in Latin America today. So let's keep hearing her. So this is a parody letter he wrote as if he was Thomas Shannon.
Experts got wrong about the global economy. Thanks for joining me, Mark.
Thanks for having me here, Sharmini.
All right, Mark, let's start off with why you felt you had to pen this letter in order to draw attention to the undoing of the pink tide in Latin America.
Well, I thought it would be more interesting and readable. Most people are not that interested in the recent history of Latin America. And also, I want to emphasize that everything in there is true, except for the fact that he didn't actually write the letter. But everything he says in there, the facts are all sourced and they're all public information. And even where it refers to positions that he took within the State Department, those are positions that were documented in the media.
All right, Mark, in 2008, almost all of the South and Central American states had progressive or center-left governments in place. And this includes El Salvador, Nicaragua, Honduras, Venezuela, Ecuador, Bolivia, Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, Chile, and Brazil. Now, only Bolivia, El Salvador, and Venezuela.
Hold on a second. Sorry, that's me. That's me in the background. Sorry about that. Fix it in a second.
Venezuela and Nicaragua remain with the
So we're going to have to reload this.
Everything
in a great deal of trouble and in crisis. So give us a sense of what happened.
Well, some of it was due to...
Oh, for Christ's sakes. Okay. Pause that one.
Deal of trouble and in crisis. So give us a sense of what happened.
Well, some of it was due to the recessions that these countries experienced. So, for example, in Brazil, they went into recession in 2014, and that's when the opposition began to gain ground and eventually impeach Dilma, the president, Dilma Rousseff, who they impeached without ever actually accusing her of a crime.
That is false. False, 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 false. She was impeached because of the Odebrecht scandal, which is, by the way, engulfing the rest of Latin America.
And so in all these countries, there were various factors at play. But what I
Nicaragua.
Dilma Rousseff.
I'm going to have to close a few tabs here. Some of these we've already read through, so, you know. See here, close that window, close that window.
Letter, and in the form of Thomas Shannon taking credit for it, is that the U.S. played a role in most of these countries where there was a change of government. Some of it is not well known. Obviously, some of it is. In the 2009 coup in Honduras, Hillary Clinton wrote in her memoirs that she helped ensure that the democratically elected president of Honduras did not come back to office after the coup. But in others, people don't even know. So, for example, in Argentina, the U.S. government under
So they cite a coup from, I think it was 2010 in Honduras. And I will say that, it's never a good thing when the military decides to overthrow a government. The fact is, though, that the government of Manuel Zelaya was trying to violate the Constitution of Honduras. They were trying to repeal a term limit amendment in the Constitution, and he was impeached, and he refused to leave, and they just overthrew him. Now, the U.S. involvement in it, which was under President Obama, was maybe it was untoward. I certainly would say we should have taken a neutral stance, not even gotten involved. But people have to get real here. These people that get removed in military coups don't necessarily, sometimes they basically screw themselves over through their policies. And Manuel Zelaya was an excellent case of it. And he was not murdered. He was not dragged through the streets like has happened in other countries. He basically was put on a plane and told to go away. And nowadays, yes, Honduras is under a right-wing dictator, which is also, you could say the military should have probably gotten rid of him as well. And I think, you know what? I believe he repealed term limits. So, why shouldn't they have gotten rid of him too? So I think it works both ways. But they mourn over somebody who's going to repeal a constitutional amendment. But they don't mention that. And they don't mention that he was basically removed from office legally. What they could like to call that is a soft coup. It doesn't matter. You can call it whatever you want. But it's still a fully legal move. You can't go to other countries and say, well, your laws are unjust and we want you to do as we say because you're unfair, you're being mean, and then claim that you're non-interventionist. Because then you've just completely contradicted your point.
Obama opposed loans to the government and blocked some at the Inter-American Development Bank and the World Bank. And this was a time when Argentina was having a balance of payments problems, so that was important. And they did run into some economic trouble. It wasn't severe, but I think it contributed to a close election result where the right was able to win in at the end of 2015. And also, I should say that in the case of Argentina, they were severely hurt by a decision of a New York judge to take 90% of their creditors hostage and say that the government could not pay them until they paid the vulture funds. And that was very much a political decision. And in fact, the judge lifted his injunction as soon as the right-wing president Macri was elected, and said it was because there was a new government that he was lifting the injunction. So that was a major thing from the United States as well. And you can go through all of the countries, and some of it I've already said here on the Real News. There was a U.S. role, and of course we only see the tip of the iceberg. Lula was interviewed a few months ago, and he said, it took us 50 years before we found out about the U.S. role in the 1964 coup. And so he was saying that to answer a question about what the United States was doing in Brazil. But you can see things that they did there as well. In fact, Shannon himself, Thomas Shannon, met with the leader of the coup effort, the parliamentary coup in Brazil, in 2016, when the leader in the Senate in Brazil.
See, they're calling it a coup, and a legal impeachment is not a coup. Okay, a coup implies that you have something that circumvents the regular rule of law. Now, an impeachment, you can say an impeachment is illegitimate. That's what they used to say in the 90s when they were trying to impeach Clinton. Now the evidence now shows that the left, which never stood up against Clinton in the 90s, it shows that he was guilty of crimes that were far worse than what he was being impeached for. And the things that he was being impeached for nowadays, they would hang him on a pole for if a current president was doing that. Okay, this is the difference. But now, this is why I don't bring morality into it. I say here that this is an issue of, do you believe in the law? Do you believe in the sovereignty of other countries, or do you not believe in them? Because if you don't believe in the sovereignty of other countries, then you can't claim that an impeachment process that was duly proceeded with in Brazil, you can't claim that it was a coup, because that was part of the Brazilian constitution. You can claim that the basis for the impeachment was wrong. You can claim that. You can claim that the new president, Michel Temer, was just as corrupt as Dilma Rousseff, who was impeached. That's fine. You can claim that, but it does not negate the fact that that the impeachment process was not a coup. That you're calling it a coup in order to politically weaponize that topic and make it seem as if you're standing on the side of justice, and that the Brazilians themselves don't have a right to remove a person from power through non-electoral means. That's built into the constitution of a country like Brazil in order to address just such a situation. That's why. I mean, by the way, there is, those people who say, the impeach Trump movement is out of their minds. Look, there could be a possible situation that would arise that we would need to impeach a president such as Donald Trump. The question is, what's the basis of the impeachment effort? If it's based on a lack of evidence, then we should oppose it. But we can't call it necessarily a coup unless they're using extra legal means to pursue it. Okay, they're using the term coup because they want to remove the legitimacy of the process, which is a legal process.
Of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Aloysio Nunes, came to the U.S. just a day after the vote to impeach Dilma took place in the House, and met with Shannon. So that was a signal to everyone in Brazil that the U.S. was behind this coup.
All right, Mark. Now, you argue that, of course, this kind of U.S. policy had a role to play in so many countries. Now, give us some examples. For example, Haiti and Honduras and Brazil. Just remind people what the U.S. policy actually did in these countries.
Well, Haiti is a good example because they kind of did that in broad daylight. They took the president, the elected president in 2004, flew him out of the country on one of those rendition planes, basically kidnapped him. And they didn't even care. That was under George W. Bush, but the effort actually began under Clinton in 2000. There was an election there, and the Organization of American States observers went there and they produced a report saying that everything was good. And then they changed that, and they basically had a technical objection to some of the Senate elections. And they used that. Then the U.S. government, under first Clinton and then Bush, used that as a pretext to cut off almost all international aid to Haiti, which was desperately poor. And then they, by 2004, after 4 years of destabilization, they were funding opposition groups. And they were also telling the president, Aristide, that he wouldn't get aid restored until he reached an agreement with the opposition. And then at the same time, they were telling the opposition, don't reach an agreement, don't make any agreement with him because we're going to get rid of him. And that's how they did it. And they overthrew the government. And that was the second time they had overthrown the Haitian government since 1991. And so that was just, one example. Obviously, there was also the Honduran coup.
Before you go there, in Haiti's case, they had the aid of a few other nations as well, France and Canada.
That's right. And they got almost all the countries in the world to cut off their aid to Haiti between 2000 and 2004. And then in 2011, there was an election in 2010. And in 2011, the United States actually used the Organization of American States to overturn the results of the first round of the presidential election. And in that case, they also threatened Haiti to accept the results, or they would cut off the post-earthquake aid, which was even more desperately needed. And so they got to choose who made it into the second round and who became president there as well. And this really devastated Haiti in so many ways. I mean, you only had like a 20% turnout in the last presidential election in Haiti.
Okay, I want to say something here. Everything that he's talking about is true, and it does show really the failure of American policy towards Haiti. But Haiti was not one of the countries that was part of the pink tide. In fact, you could say that Haiti has been a complete basket case, whatever stripe of government you've had there. You've had right-wing governments, you've had kind of left-wing governments as well, you've had fascist governments, you've had all sorts of different governments in Haiti. And they've all been a complete failure. And it's really a mystery to me what type of system would work there. It's not a country with great natural resources, and how do you come up with a prescription for a place where everything else has failed?
Because people have become so disenfranchised as a result, primarily of U.S. intervention.
Now, one could argue, having a poor country like Haiti, who is so dependent on the U.S., U.S. can flex their muscles and make sure what they want takes place in Haiti. But what about a country like Brazil?
Well, I think they did. Like I said, I think that signal was important. The show of support for that coup, I think, helped. There was another show of support.
That again, he's using the word coup. It is not a coup. When you have the Senate and the House voting to impeach somebody and voting under a legal process to remove somebody from office, you can question the motivations. You can question the basis of the impeachment proceeding. You cannot call it a coup. They don't even use the word soft coup in this segment. It is just blatant dishonesty. It is lying about the facts of what happened. Okay, and this is something. The words soft coup are kind of they're a sign of complete bitterness, of a lack of of evidence. The fact of the matter is that the Rousseff government and by connection, the Lula government before it in Brazil ran Brazil into one of the worst recessions of the past few years. Even while you know much of the world economy was improving, even under Obama, much of the world economy was improving. It's a good question who was benefiting from it, but Brazil was in one of the worst recessions in its history. And part of it was because of the mismanagement of Lula and Rousseff. There are people. These are people that understand it that the left is supporting these people that kick people off of their land in order to build stadiums for the World Cup and the Olympics. This is who they support. They don't care, you know. But yes, call it a coup. That's you redefining what a coup means. But then you want to call yourself a progressive, even though you support a government that kicked people off out of their slums in order to build stadiums for an event that lasted a few weeks. That's progressivism. That's concern for the needy. No, that's not.
When John Kerry went down to Brazil in August 5th of the same year, and he held a joint press conference with the acting foreign minister, José Serra, and they talked about how great their relationship was going to be going forward. And Dilma wasn't even removed from office yet. She was still, the Senate hadn't voted yet to remove her from office, so that was another signal of support. Again, we don't know what else they did. Actually, we do know some other things. The Department of Justice was involved in the investigation, the big corruption investigation there. And so we don't know what they did, how it is that they managed to get Lula put in jail, while the banks who must have laundered, you know, the billions of dollars of corruption, there were no banks or financial institutions implicated in this whole investigation. So that's very odd. And of course, you know, most Brazilians think that the Department of Justice intervention in the investigation was probably political, and they have good reason to believe that.
And Honduras, of course, Argentina, Venezuela too. But let's just dig into the Honduras case, because I think that's also left people's memory.
Yes, well, in 2009, there was a coup, and the president was, in June of 2009, the president was flown out of the country in the middle of the night, and he was, he was overthrown. And the first statement that came out of the White House was really foretold everything that was going to happen and showed what the real position of the United States was, because it didn't even condemn the coup. It just said, all parties should work together and try and arrive at a solution. And
yeah, the thing is that the United States often doesn't comment. We've had coups in Pakistan where the U.S. doesn't comment on which side, because how are you supposed to know who you're going to deal with the next day? If you deal with, and that's one of the flaws of our policy with Pakistan. That's one of our flaws with our policies with other countries as well. But these things do happen. These things are part of the way the world works. For him to claim, the U.S. should have condemned the coup explicitly, sure, that they've done it to other countries, and then there's other countries where they haven't done it. And the fact of the matter is that what happened in Honduras was probably not handled in a way that helped the country go forward. But Zelaya was basically faking, he was faking this whole movement where he was gonna, turn Honduras into, he was basically going close to the Chavistas. But the problem is that he was violating the Constitution. He was trying to amend the Constitution without the help of the Congress over there in order to give him unlimited terms, to repeal the term limits. In Honduras at the time, they made a rule that, or years earlier, they had made a rule that the president is elected for one term and he's term limited. And Zelaya wanted to repeal that. And that's why he was overthrown. Now, the fact of the matter is that in the next few years, another president, I forgot his name, the Honduran president, did repeal that law, a right-wing dictator. So you could say that now would be the perfect time for the parliament, for the Congress and everybody to impeach him as well. You know, if the thing is that if you have leaders who violate a constitution, hi Mark Anthony, who violate a constitution and basically try to grab more and more power, it shouldn't matter what side of the aisle they're on, whether they're progressive or whether they're conservative or retrograde or you know whatever label you want to give to them. If they're violating the constitution of the country, then you have a problem there, and it's time to vote them out.
When a military coup happens in the 21st century and you don't even say anything bad about it, and they knew it was coming as well, we found that out later. So clearly they had time to prepare a statement, and they don't even say anything's wrong. That was a massive signal to everyone that they supported it. And then as the coup proceeded and the government needed to establish its legitimacy, the United States was practically alone in supporting the election that legitimated the coup later that year. And as I said, Hillary Clinton wrote in her memoirs that she helped make sure that the elected president didn't go back, which was what almost all of Latin America wanted. And the U.S. manipulated the Organization of American States to prevent there from being a stronger actions on their part to put Zelaya back in office. And in fact, out of that came the community of Latin American and Caribbean states, which the left governments created because of the U.S. manipulation of the OAS. And that includes all of the countries of the hemisphere except the U.S. and Canada.
All right, Mark, there's so much more to talk about.
So yeah, they didn't get to Venezuela or Peru or Ecuador, which I'll get to, I think 3 of those countries, Argentina, Ecuador, and Peru, because we talk a lot about Venezuela. We talk a lot about Nicaragua, which you've already discussed today. This is Ecuador. The Vice President, Jorge Glass, was convicted. He was convicted and sentenced to 6 years for illegal association with Odebrecht. Odebrecht, for those of you that don't know, was a contracting company that, you know, a building contractor, I believe, that they rigged a lot of contracts in most of these progressive states in Latin America, as well as I believe other ones that are not progressive, including Peru, I think. So, you know, they've corrupted governments that are both progressive and not progressive. So it says the Criminal Tribunal of the National Court of Justice in Ecuador found guilty the Prime Minister of the country, Jorge Glass, through a trial for illegal association with Odebrecht. The judge, Edgar Flores Mier, sentenced him to 6 years in prison. So this was in 2017, I believe, around the time that the government of Rafael Correa was leaving power. This is Rafael Correa, who, by the way, is now under Interpol red notice because he apparently helped kidnap a person who was an opponent of his from Colombia a few years ago. So I'm not going to say whether I believe that Correa should be extradited. I don't know the facts of that case. And I don't necessarily know all the facts of what happened in Ecuador with Odebrecht and with Jorge Glass. But for people to behave as if the pink tide brought anything good to Latin America, they have to ignore the fact that in every one of these countries, the same corruption scandal just keeps breaking out. You know, illegal bid rigging. Did I say big rigging? Bid rigging. So bid rigging means that there's contracts coming up, government contracts, and you basically sway the results such that one contractor or another gets the job. And it's illegal here in America, and it's probably illegal in the majority of the countries in the world if they, you know, follow their own laws. Now, the fact is that a lot of them haven't followed their own laws ever. So, you know, you can make the argument, well, why are they picking on these leftist leaders? Well, okay, when do you want them to start cracking down on corruption, guys? Do you want them to start cracking down on corruption when your opponents are in power, or do you want them to start cracking down on corruption when your phony baloney progressive people are in power? The ones who claim that they're going to clean up corruption and create and eliminate wealth inequality, right? So you can either want there to be a crackdown on corruption, Or you can say, well, you know, when it's your guys, I want them to be sent to prison, and when it's my guys, I don't know what the problem is. So so it says here, the judge declared that Glass decided with Jose Conceição Santos the allotment of public contracts in exchange for payments. Okay, yes, for bribes. In this context, the judge emphasized that the vice president was a principal of the crime, so he was actually involved directly in the crime. Another direct defendant in the crime was Ricardo Rivera, who was an uncle of Jorge Glass. Okay, so Jorge Glass's uncle cultivated Santos, who is one of the other people involved in this, who found other elements. Looks like he found other crimes to charge 6 people with the crime of illegal association with Odebrecht, which is the construction firm. So the judge stated that in order to accomplish this conviction, they needed the help of the Department of Justice of the United States. And as well as the testimony of the executive of Odebrecht, Jose Conceição Santos, and as well as messages exchanged between the two. Okay, so those of you that are saying, okay, so the United States manipulated this. Well, what do you want? Do you want us not to cooperate with the law enforcement organizations of other countries, such as Ecuador, which, by the way, still has a, so to speak, progressive leader, Lenin Moreno, although, you know, probably less progressive in many ways than Rafael Correa. By the way, that's the same. The new president is the one who's screwing over Julian Assange. So let's not pretend that he's a great person. It also says that the judge stated that Glass was the leader of the Solidarity Fund, the coordinating minister of strategic affairs, and the vice president of the country, those are jobs from which he was at the forefront of contracts on major projects that were awarded to Odebrecht. Okay, so this is a scandal that's broken out all over South America. Okay, I just use this Spanish language source because otherwise you guys are going to you're going to say, oh, what are you using, Bloomberg? What are you, some sort of a Koch brothers whore or something? Well, okay, so I used here El Comercio of Ecuador. I believe it's of Ecuador. It might be Peruvian. Doesn't matter. Let me see here. What country is this? Yep, it's Ecuador. So there you go, guys. There you go. What do you want? You want people not to go to prison for corruption just because they happen to share the same bullshit values that you do? What would you say if I said, let's say Rick Santorum got he accepted like a $3 million bribe from ExxonMobil, and I would say, well, I mean, he happens to be somewhat of a conservative, and I also happen to be somewhat of a conservative. So why don't you just let it go? No, you have to hold public officials accountable, whatever side of the aisle they're on, or else it means you don't give a fuck about the law. It means that the law basically is, you want it to be an issue of the world is your oyster or something. Let's see. Shreves and Mark are arguing about something. So yeah, Pinochet says there were immigrants from Poland and had business dealings in South America. They didn't want to see the socialist wave engulf their holdings. Let me put it this way, okay? Everybody's socialist until they get that big payout. Then they suddenly become, like Pitbull, Mr. Worldwide, Mr. Worldwide, Mr. The president it says here, I'm not going to read through the whole article, but the president of Ecuador, the former president, says that he's not leaving Belgium, where his wife is from, because he's afraid of getting convicted. He says, let me see here. According to a statement on Twitter, the public prosecutor requested the pretrial detention of Correa for non-compliance. He called for Interpol to be notified through a red alert for Correa's capture and extradition. Correa denies any involvement in the case or being the author of Balda's kidnapping. That's the guy who was kidnapped apparently for a while. His lawyer, Caupolicán Ochoa, said this decision is arbitrary, it is a lie, it is defamatory. I do not believe they are seeking justice, but rather revenge. Correa wrote on Twitter, they will seek to humiliate us and make us suffer a tough time, but a monstrosity like this will never prosper in a country like Belgium with rule of law. Get the fuck out of here. Belgium being the rule of law. Those are the same people. They ignored the oppression of the Catalans last year during the Catalan referendum. People just the Spanish police just beat the fuck out of everybody. So he wants to say, it's always justice when it's justice for you, and then when somebody else gets a fair showing, then suddenly it's injustice. That's the way we work in this world. What are we supposed to do about that? So that's it about Ecuador. What about former President Ollanta Humala of Peru? It says Peru's former left-leaning president Ollanta Humala, ordered to spend 18 months in pretrial detention, was moved on Friday to a prison built for his longtime foe, ex-autocratic leader Alberto Fujimori, who, by the way, was a right-winger. Fujimori, 78, has spent the past decade as the lone inmate in Barbadillo prison, nestled in a police base on the outskirts of Lima, where he is serving a 25-year sentence for human rights crimes during his 1990 to 2000 right-wing government. Humala, a former military officer whose 5-year term ended a year ago, was transferred via police helicopter to Barbadillo, where he will be held in custody until prosecutors conclude their money laundering investigation. Humala's attorneys had sought better conditions for their client than Peru's overcrowded jails. So is that not a two-tiered system of justice? You get your own fucking prison if you're the president, just like the former president did, another criminal president, Fujimori. A judge ruled on Thursday that Humala and wife Nadine Heredia must be jailed before an eventual trial to keep them from fleeing or obstructing a criminal probe linked to Brazilian builder Odebrecht. The couple has denied wrongdoing and immediately turned themselves in, calling the measure an abuse of power. So we'll see, again, I don't know if he's guilty or not. But if he is, then it's a bigger betrayal than if somebody who's not a so-called progressive is. Because those of us that believe in private enterprise, it's understandable in our minds why somebody would take a bribe. For somebody to come to power as a socialist and then enrich themselves means that they have to hold themselves to a different standard. And again, this is Odebrecht, or Odebrecht, whatever they call it. I have Gabriel Swift here. Welcome, man. I think he's from England. Free Farage. Humala became a national figure when he commanded a group of soldiers to rebel against Fujimori's government as it collapsed amid a graft scandal in 2000. He later rallied Fujimori's opponents behind him to beat Fujimori's daughter Keiko in the 2011 presidential election. So this is a person who did do a coup. So were coups better back then? Because the coups were progressive at the time. But because it's a social construct, coups are now, listen to this guy, they're racist. That is basically what they're saying. That back when they did the coups, when Humala did the coup, when Chavez did the coup, I think it was in 1993 or 94 in Venezuela, then it was okay. Then the coup was a symbol of the resistance. But now it's a symbol of oppression. Even if it's not really a coup, it's just a constitutional motion in order to, assert Congress's right to impeach a president, as happened in Brazil. But it's still a coup in their mind. That's the double standard. That's what the left believes. Still, Fujimori's son, Congressman Kenji Fujimori, expressed, so I guess it's probably Fujimori because it's a Japanese name, but expressed solidarity with Humala and Heredia's children. I went through those tough times myself. Stay strong, he said on Twitter. Excuse me. I'm channeling Hillary Clinton here. Peru built Barbadillo for Fujimori before he was extradited from Chile in 2007. His cell includes a bedroom, office, and access to a courtyard where he gardens. According to this is fantastic. This is almost as good as the house I live in. You know, the difference being that I can also run to the store. Fujimori and Humala will not share common spaces, INPE said. That's the National Penitentiary Institute. After Odebrecht admitted in December to paying $29 million in bribes to high-ranking officials in Peru over 3 presidencies, Peru's justice minister said additional cells were being built at Barbadillo, but did not specify for whom. So those are countries where they have to build new prison cells in order to accommodate the presidents that are supposed to be put there because they are corrupt. They have to accommodate corrupt. There's not enough room in their special presidential prisons for the number of presidents and politicians that need to be held there. Isn't that odd? And yet these people are pretending. These communist frauds are pretending that for some reason it is America's fault that these people get themselves into this sticky business. Former President Alejandro Toledo, another staunch opponent of Fujimori, has also been ordered to pretrial detention in connection with an Odebrecht probe. Toledo has denied wrongdoing and has refused to turn himself in. In an odd twist of fate, Fujimori might leave Barbadillo before Humala because I think his sentence is running up. President Pedro Pablo Kuczynski, who endorsed Keiko Fujimori against Humala in 2011, last month proposed evaluating pardoning Fujimori for health reasons as he seeks better ties with Fujimori's supporters in Congress. By the way, I think Kuczynski has also been impeached, who's a right-winger. So what do you want? Was that a coup, guys? Because the right-winger was impeached this time. Was that a coup? Is there a coup going on in South America only when it's a left-winger that's impeached? I want to know, seriously, what's the answer? What's the answer? In 2013, Humala rejected Fujimori's request for a pardon. So, the irony. The irony. You can see here that, are you guys hearing me, by the way? Is it good? So you have Nicaragua's leader, Daniel Ortega's brother, calls on him to end the violence. His own brother is asking him to bring elections forward. So this is from the BBC. Not going to read through it. And then another thing. This is what's another reason why in Ecuador, things just went sour for these communist frauds. Okay, it says, why don't the indigenous people like Rafael Correa anymore? And this is from December 8th, 2015. It says, after 10 days of walking and no respite from the fatigue and the scarce support of the government, this person says Rafael Correa has offended the indigenous people. Chanted a number of, hundreds of natives, many of them former followers of the President Correa, upon entering Quito, which is the capital, Tuesday afternoon, in order to join a national strike by the opposition. The Quechuas and I don't know who the Saraguros are, left on August 2nd from the south of the country. So they walked from August 2nd through December 8th, I guess, from the south of the country and covered 800 kilometers by foot and car in order to reach their destination. In the capital, they wanted to made heard how several times their claim against Correa, the leftist president that, according to them, has divided the indigenous movement and with offers of to some of their leaders and ferocious critics that they wouldn't. I don't know what this means. Plegaron. Ofrecimiento a algunos de sus líderes y críticas feroces a quienes no se. So it says undoubtedly there is no. However, there is no force capable of bringing the government down through their risings, their unarmed protests, and they are not filling the streets like they did in the 90s. So yeah, it's possible that it's not just possible. It's true that this was not as bad as previous protests by the opposition by these indigenous peoples. Even so. The 250 protesters of the Confederation of Indigenous Nationalities of Ecuador, CONAIE, marched gladly, chanting and hailing spontaneously as they walked towards Ecuador, towards Quito, where they did join the strike, where they will join the strike and. Will come together this Thursday with unions and right-wing groups. This time, they say they will make sure that that Korea will be corrected. And here's a quote down here. It says, "I voted the first time for Korea, thinking that the conversation was genuine. Afterwards, they decided that the conversation was stolen from the indigenous movement because we went against him." Stated to the French press, Luis Sarango, an indigenous person that marched from Loja, which is close to the Peruvian border, to Quito. So, look, we're not going to read through the whole thing, but this is further evidence. These are people that, they're. Let me look this up. Okay. These are people that they were promised under these leftist leaders. They were promised that they would get a better deal than they did under right-wing leaders. But instead, they were getting basically the shaft. They were getting the shaft the whole time. It says here, this is from Public Radio International, NPR. It's not the right wing. It's not the Koch brothers or anything. It says, these indigenous Amazonians are standing up to Ecuador's oil invasion. That's from about 1 year later, or even less. It's from a couple months later than that article. It says, in one of the most ecologically diverse corners of the planet, a small tribe is fending off oil corporations that want to drill their ancestral land. It takes first a bumpy 20-minute drive from the city of Tena, then a 2-hour journey on a rudimentary canoe to meet the Daya family, one of the few Guarani communities in the Amazon rainforest who have not yet abandoned their traditional ways. For most of modern history, this indigenous group lived away from other populations uncontacted. Missionaries first approached the Guaranis, who now number about 4,000 people, in the late 1950s. Today, international oil companies in the Amazon have fundamentally disrupted the Guaranis' way of life. They have displaced many indigenous communities who live in family groups throughout the rainforest in order to drill the ground beneath them. In Ecuador, oil corporations have promised indigenous groups food, clothes, cash, and even weapons for their cooperation. Well, I take that deal, but that's just me. In 1991, a young group of Guaranis educated outside their community created the Organization of the Guarani Nationality of the Ecuadorian Amazon, which inked an agreement with oil companies that allowed wide access to Guarani land. While the oil trade brought new wealth to the locals, it also came at a steep cost. The industry vastly changed local cultures and practices, and beyond that, has threatened the Guaranis' very existence. Industrial pollutants have both contaminated water and caused diseases like cancer. But unlike many Guaranis to date, the insular Daya family says they won't be bought. They are the face of the indigenous resistance against the oil industry. Instead of accepting corporate handouts, they sell traditional crafts and bags made of banana leaves to the curious souls ecotourism agencies bring to the area. Dressed in a t-shirt, jeans, and rubber boots, Kawo is the only family member wearing Western clothes. She is their liaison to the tourist industry who works with local guides to bring in visitors interested in meeting indigenous tribes faithful to their customs. The family also sells fish to local markets in Tena. While they're unique among the Waoranis, the Daya struggle to resist the influence of oil companies is emblematic of the crusade of most of Ecuador's indigenous communities are waging against multinational companies to preserve their native land. The battle is unequal. In August 2013, Ecuador's President Rafael Correa gave the green light to oil companies to drill in the Amazon's Yasuni National Park. Okay, very progressive, right? Drilling in a national park. Okay, a place with more flora than anywhere else in the world. To do so, he axed the key initiative, the Yasuni Ishpingo Tambococha Tiputini. And I'm surprised I wasn't coughing during that long name. That had previously prevented companies from extracting oil from the park in exchange for international donations totaling $3.6 billion. That's not Scott Pruitt doing that. That's the leader of a left-wing South American nation. On the 3-hour walk across the rainforest back to Tena, Nagaya Nankimo, the head of the Daya family, suddenly pauses to admire the beauty that surrounds him. The animist man sits on a tree trunk and watches the sky. This is everything we have, he whispers in broken Spanish. So, you see all these photos and everything. So look, I'm not going to tell you to morally oppose Ecuador because I happen to think, these people should get at least a say in what happens to their land. I'm not going to make this out to be the most important thing in the world. But you should realize that when leftist Americans defend leftist Latin Americans, they're directly contradicting their own position here. When those of us who paid attention to the Dakota Access Pipeline wrote letters or there are people who did much more than I did. I think I donated like a few bucks or whatever. But there were people who got arrested for opposing a pipeline. Okay, just a pipeline. When they support countries like Venezuela, countries like Ecuador, countries like Nicaragua, they are effectively consenting to the robbing of land from indigenous peoples in order to give them to who? To the oil companies. Okay, so those of you that think that this is a bunch of bullshit, that this is all about, you're saving the trees or whatever. Listen, if you call yourself a progressive, maybe stand up for the values that you supposedly believe in. Otherwise, you have no right to deflect and point at Lebanon and point at America and point at Israel or whatever and say, oh, it's much better, in this country, whatever, even though they're poor. You don't know what the fuck you're talking about. I don't give a shit if you've read every Noam Chomsky book in the that he's put out, because it doesn't matter. It will not change the truth. And the truth is that progressivism still does lead to corruption. It still leads to state control over the individual. And in this case, it leads to state control over communities. So I will read the comments before we leave. I don't know if you guys want more music. You make me want to play Tropical Bowl. I don't even know what that is, so sorry. I think we're pretty up to date. So I don't know if we're going to have another chat tonight. I don't have anything else keeping me from doing one. But I do want to thank the people who stayed with me this entire time, because it was a technical difficulty. I also was supposed to go somewhere else, but, what are you going to do? So I'll read from the top as far as I can go. Shreebs, Lightning number 116, that's Jeff. Perseus Gold, Nick's Radio. Kiana Rainey, thanks for joining. I didn't know that you watched this channel. Lisa PDX. Kristen. Larry Gerke, of course. Christian JR. Most of you people are from the ABL stream, I think. Let's see here. Who did I miss? Mad Dodge Productions, of course. Can't forget him. Good friend. A. Pinochet. Carlos77X. Always good to have you.